Kia ora, good morning everyone, Rich Wong here. Welcome back to the channel. 28mm is a focal length that I myself am quite familiar with. For example, when I went to Japan with my family a few years ago, I only bought my Leica Q, which has a fixed 28mm lens on it, and I really enjoyed the shooting experience during that trip. I think the photos turns out pretty nice. The Leica Q's lens is a 28mm f1.7, so it could provide me a bit of background-foreground separation when my main subject is at a close distance, which gives the photo quite a nice and different, slightly wide-angle look when compared to, say, if I use a 50mm or even a 35mm lens. But sometimes I do wish I can blur the background a little bit more to make my subject stand out a little bit more. So if you also like to shoot with 28mm lens and also want something a little bit faster, then you would be interested in the lens that I'm reviewing today, which is the Argus 28mm f1.2 lens for full-frame mirrorless cameras. As usual, we'll have a look at the lens design, do some image quality tests, and I'll also share with you some of my real-world photos in this review. And just a usual disclaimer before we start, the lens sample I use in this review is a pre-production sample sent to me by Laowa, but I do have to send it back as soon as this review is done. They haven't paid me any money, and what I'm going to say is not influenced by Laowa at all. If you are a regular viewer on this channel, you should be quite familiar with the Laowa Argus series lenses. We have looked at a few different Argus lenses on this channel in the past, but one thing that is a little bit different with this latest 28mm Argus lens is that this is a f1.2 lens, while all the previous Argus lenses are f0.95. f1.2 is still a very fast aperture. It is half a stop faster than an f1.4 lens. I asked Laowa why they created f1.2 Argus lens this time. The main reason is because while they want to create a very fast lens, but they also want to reduce the size and weight of the lens a little bit this time. So if you have watched some of my previous Laowa Argus lenses review, you may remember I mentioned those f0.95 lenses are really quite big and heavy. So this 28mm lens is quite a bit lighter and smaller. For example, the Argus 35mm f0.95 lens is 755 grams, while this 28mm f1.2 lens is 562 grams. It is still not light by any means, but the 200 gram difference is really quite noticeable. While the length of the lens is quite similar to the other full-frame Argus lenses, the diameter of the lens is quite a bit smaller, so it's not as chunky when you're holding it. As usual, the lens has a full metal construction that feels very solid and also very nice quality. We have the Argus style removable lens hood at the front, which has a flexible lens cap that slides into the lens hood. If you want to use a filter, you can just remove the lens hood, then there is a 62mm front filter thread. The lens is available for 4 different full-frame camera mounts: Sony E, Nikon Z, Canon RF, and also Leica L mount. The sample I received from Laowa is for the Nikon Z mount, but apart from the lens mount itself, the lens is exactly the same for all the different mount versions. So even though I'm using a Z mount version for this review, whatever I'm going to tell you should apply to all the different versions as well. This is a fully mechanical lens with no electronic contacts, so the EXIF data recorded on the photo wouldn't record the lens information, including the aperture you use. And it is a manual focus lens. We have a large manual focus ring here on the lens. Focus flow is around 90 degrees, not particularly long, but I found it works okay, as even though it is f1.2 lens, because of the 28mm focal length, so the depth of field is not super shallow, so 90 degree focus flow I think is acceptable. The focus ring is very smooth and a little bit tight. I think it works really well for photography, but videographers may prefer if the focus ring is not as tight. We have a mechanical aperture ring near the lens mount. The aperture ring can be switched between the normal mode that has clicks, or you can declick it very easily by using the switch at the bottom of the lens. Photographers usually really hate lens that doesn't have clicks, and videographer is opposite, so I'm really glad to see this aperture ring switch on the Argus 28mm lens has this switchable design, and I think more lenses need to have this design as well. The minimum focus distance of this lens is 0.5 meter or about 19.7 inches. Not particularly close for a 28mm lens. Because of that, the maximum magnification ratio is only 0.073 times, which is the smallest maximum magnification ratio of all the lenses that I have tested recently. The sharpness when shooting photo at minimum focus distance is not bad, reasonably sharp, but the contrast is slightly low. But once I stop down the lens slightly to f1.4, then the contrast would improve to pretty decent level. Okay, now let's have a look at the image sharpness. At f1.2, the center sharpness is acceptable, but slightly low in contrast. The contrast becomes better as soon as you stop down the lens slightly to f1.4. At f2, the center sharpness becomes really good already. Then it remains really good until f11 when diffraction starting to soften up the image. And if you look at the corner, at f1.2, it is definitely a little bit soft, but still good enough for me to read the numbers on the test chart. Stop down to f2 improve the corner sharpness quite a bit. Then the corner sharpness will improve gradually until around f8, which we get the best corner sharpness. And this is when I focus at the center of the photo. If I focus at the corner, I can get slightly better corner sharpness. This is noticeable at f1.2, but surprisingly, even when I stop down the lens to f4, f5.6, I can still see the difference between the photos that I focus at the center and at the corner. I guess it suggests the lens does have a little bit of field curvature. One of the reasons why you will want to buy this 28mm Laowa Argus lens is that you can create more foreground-background separation than the typical 28mm lenses in the market. The bokeh in the background looks pretty decent when you're shooting at wide open. Bokeh looks smooth and it doesn't look nervous at all. We don't see much halo ring at the edge of the bokeh balls. Because of the lens 13 braid aperture design, bokeh balls remains pretty round even when I stop down the lens quite a bit. Look at this photo that was shot at f8. The bokeh still remains very round. This is very useful when you are shooting close-up photos, as you may want to stop down the lens a bit to increase the depth of field, and still you can get some very nice round bokeh balls in the background. Next, we'll have a look at the vignetting performance. At the maximum aperture f1.2, vignetting is very noticeable. You can see the corners are much darker than the center of the photo. At f1.4, there is some small improvement. Stop down to f2, then it becomes quite a bit better. But you have to stop down to around f5.6 to get rid of most of the vignetting. There is still a bit of light fall off at the corner even if you further stop down the lens. This Argus lens has very good chromatic aberration control. While I won't say it has no chromatic aberration at all, for a f1.2 lens, the amount of color fringing I see is a lot less than what I expected. In a lot of my high contrast photos, I see very minimal or even no chromatic aberration. There's some, but it's just really not bad for a f1.2 lens, and you could remove them quite easily in post-processing if you want. So chromatic aberration, or I should say lack of chromatic aberration, is definitely one of the pros of this Laowa 28mm Argus lens. In terms of distortion, Laowa didn't call this a COD lens, and I do see a bit of barrel distortion in the photos that are shot with this lens. I won't say it is terrible, but it's quite easy to notice that in my brick wall test photo, and even with some of the other real-world photos that I shot, I can still see the distortion near the edge of the photo. Okay, let's have a look at the lens flare performance now. And let's check out this video that I shot at f1.2 on a sunny day. I think the lens flare performance is reasonably good overall. Even when I point the camera towards the sun, there isn't too much lens flare, and while there is a bit of ghosting, I think the amount is acceptable and it doesn't look terrible to my eyes at all. In some of the most extreme examples that I got, the contrast would drop a bit like this photo, but still I think it is not terrible, and I think it just adds a little bit of character to my photos. Compared to the previous Laowa lenses, especially the Laowa Argus lenses, I think this 28mm Argus lens has better overall lens flare control. I wouldn't need to worry too much when there's a strong light source directly in front of the camera. If you want to have Sunstars in your photo, you need to stop down the lens to at least f5.6, then you can start see a bit of Sunstars in your photos. And as you stop down the lens more, the Sunstars become sharper. The lens has a 13 aperture braid design, which would give you round, smooth bokeh even when you stop down the lens. The trade-off, however, is that the 26-point Sunstars are not as clean or as sharp when compared to, say, the typical Laowa wide-angle lenses that usually only has 5 aperture braids. Now let's have a look at this lens coma performance. If we look at this sample test photo and zoom in the corner at 200%, this f1.2 photo, there is quite noticeable coma artifact at the corner. If we stop down the lens to f1.4, it doesn't really make any noticeable improvement. But once we stop down to f2, then most of the coma artifact would disappear. If you want to use this lens for videography, I have mentioned earlier that the aperture range can be switched between the normal mode that has clicks or the corrected mode, so that is great. Focus breathing is quite noticeable when you change the focus distance dramatically. This is a test clip that I changed the focus distance between 1 meter and infinity, and it is quite easy to see the focus breathing. I'm always really excited when Laowa contact me and ask if I want to review their new lenses. The reason is simple. The lenses are always very good quality and fun to use, and they always try to do something a little bit different. And this time it is pretty much the same with this Laowa Argus 28mm f1.2 lens. It has very solid build quality and it delivers very good overall image quality. Image sharpness is not bad for a f1.2 lens, and I really like that the lens has very minimal amount of chromatic aberration for such a fast lens. While the size of the lens is still a bit bigger and heavier than the usual lenses, it is a f1.2 lens after all, so that is understandable, and it is quite a bit smaller than the previous Argus f0.95 lenses. Apart from the below average close-up capability, there really isn't too much that I don't like about this lens, at least not for photography. For videography, focus breathing is a bit more than what I want to see, and the manual focus ring could be a little bit too tight, and the focus flow could also be a little bit longer for videography for the smooth and accurate focus control. But hey, at least you can switch the aperture range to the corrected mode if you want. If you love 28mm focal length and want an ultra fast 28mm lens, this Laowa Argus 28mm f1.2 lens is definitely a very attractive option as long as you are okay with a manual focus lens. And if you just love ultra fast lenses, don't forget to check out the other Laowa Argus lens reviews on my channel.